Okay, I have started the recording, and I'd like to welcome you all to this 16th of March, the day after the Ides of March, the day before St. Patrick's Day, and it is webinar day with ForestConnect. My name's Peter Smallage. I'm the New York State Extension Forester, and it's my pleasure to offer and host Dr. Bernd Blossey. Bernd is a colleague here in the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell University, has a broad range of talents in entomology and ecology and plant ecology and forest ecology and population and community ecology and management. So Bernd brings great talents to the discussion about dealing with the issues of deer in our landscape and its impacts on the forest. And so with that, I'm going to mute my microphone and turn it over to Bernd. Bernd, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. I appreciate you joining us here on a lovely lunchtime hour where we should be all walking, but instead we are talking about deer and what to do about them, and it's a hot topic. Somebody typed it in. I will try to monitor the chat boxes down there to see whether I'm coming through loud and clear. If you have questions, I may overlook some if there are too many. I hope that there will be some time left in the end that we can go through some additional topics that I may not cover, because this is an extensive area. I've came to this entire thing of deer management because I am a plant ecologist and entomologist by training. And deer have forced themselves onto my agenda. And I don't just like to study them, I like to manage them for conservation purposes, because what I'm trying to do is follow in Aldo's footsteps. Here is something that you should see. Many of you will probably have read his Sand County Almanac or various chapters in it, and he obviously developed a land ethic, and this is what I'm trying to follow here. And the land ethic, in the words of Aldo, reflects the existence of an ecological conscience, and this in turn reflects the conviction of individual responsibility. That's what Aldo stressed for the health of the land. And he defined health as the capacity of the land for self-renewal. And then conservation is our effort to understand and preserve this capacity. So I'm trying to work in the spirit of what Aldo has articulated here, although it's not very clear in the details how you do this, and I will go through some of those things. Some of the challenges that are being presented is that it's not necessarily clear what the challenges are to individual species or to ecosystems, because the threats, or very often we call them stressors, occur all simultaneously. So we have introduced plants, we have introduced earthworms, we have native deer, we have lack of predators, we have introduced slugs. All kinds of things happen simultaneously to plants and other organisms that we may care about. Depending on who you talk to, everybody has their pet peeves of what may be driving this, whether it's climate change, acid rain, nutrient deposition, and all of these things actually happen simultaneously to the species. And so when species are declining, the question then is, who are the drivers for that? And today, as the title gave it away, and what we have already said, I will try to convince you that deer and ungulates in general, that includes elk out west, are major drivers of changes in forest ecosystems and landscapes that we tend to not appreciate. And I just highlighted a couple of species that have been declining. And if we want to manage them and bring them out of the dangers of being threatened and endangered, or maybe even going extinct, we better understand how to best approach management. Is it best to wipe out introduced earthworms if we could, or control introduced plants, or actually fence them, or take the deer out of the high abundances that we have down to something that's more amenable to the landscapes that we are inhabiting with them today? Very typically, though, what we see is when we talk about state wildlife departments, what are called Department of Environmental Conservation or Natural Resources in different states. But it's the state wildlife departments that are usually responsible for managing of wildlife, particularly game species. If you look at their mission statements, typically what you find as the big banner things is conservation of healthy habitats, conservation of individual species, and very often they add to that the conservation of the hunting heritage. And hunters consider themselves to be conservationists. They spend enormous amounts of money trying to preserve habitat or create habitat. Very recently, we have seen a lot of focus on young forests, because some species that have declined were benefiting from human activities where cutting has reduced old growth forest, or what may not have been even old growth, secondary or tertiary forest, and woodcock, grouse, or other species that are depending on younger forests, maybe declining because the forests are aging and returning, at least in the Northeast, and returning to something over 100, 200, 300 year cycle that was more traditional for the areas that at least I live in now. So the habitat management that management agencies are trying to do is often prescribed to favor individual species, but very often they say it's favoring conditions for many species, and that creates healthy habitats. The question, though, is whether that's true. Very often the evidence is missing due to very often a single species focus. And we can talk about more about that and maybe at the end if there's some time left. One of the major problems that we see when single species focus or huntable species are the focus of management is that predators are seen as competitors by hunters. Yet, as ecologists, we have come to recognize that predators are keystone species, and if they are existing in appreciable numbers, and it reflects healthier ecological relationships and healthier habitats. So there are some tensions that are obviously created just by the design or by what people are interested in. Some of the questions that I just see fly by, we will get to that. The question then is, if people say we're creating healthy landscapes and all the ones healthy land and self-renewal, how do you measure that? And as I just articulated, very often people focus on individual species. When we think about conservationists, there are botanists, there are entomologists, in the hunting communities, there is Ducks Unlimited and grouse. There's the, I don't even know what the Grouse Society is called, but there is, it's focused on individual species and not looking at the entire community. And if we articulate the problems and include more than individual species, it becomes difficult to even assess that. So the choice of the criteria or indicators to measure our management approaches is difficult. So how do we measure success? And we often need to continue this assessment because in conservation, we need to think about decades and centuries. There is no quick fix. Landscapes develop over time. Particular forests will need hundreds of years to get to something that would resemble the dynamics of an old growth forest with gaps and everything else in there. We very rarely have these old growth forests anywhere in the east. You have to go out west to find some of them. And then we need to report to others that are interested in the management approaches of whether we're actually making things better for individual species or collectively. So there's a big thing that I feel academia has fallen short on, and management agencies have fallen short on as well. But what we do know is that hunters shoot more deer. and the deer take has increased all throughout the U.S. I'm just showcasing a couple of states here. This is the hunter-reported deer kill as far as records exist in these 6 states that you can see. And this doesn't necessarily mean that deer populations, for example, in New York peaked in the year 2000. That was just the maximum kill that had been achieved. Very often the increase in deer take is a reflection of the increased availability of permits. Not necessarily more hunters, but more permits. Individual hunters can shoot more deer. There are stories about deer abundance in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s that may be much higher than what we have right now because the habitats were just more favorable to deer. Nevertheless, we know there are plenty of deer, and that's why you're listening in today. And people have been interested in deer effects for a very long time, including Aldo, who very early on, almost 100 years ago, recognized how important deer are as ecosystem engineers. And there are some studies that have tried to understand that. And this is probably one of the best experiments that was conducted not too far from where Pete and I are sitting here in the Allegheny National Forest, where the Forest Service actually caged deer at different densities. And you can see at the, let's see what I can do this. Hopefully you can see my cursor here at the x-axis. You can see the number of deer per square kilometer. They created these exclosures, had deer in there, and what you can see is that deer create a trickle-up effect or a domino effect by changing, as deer numbers increase, changing the tree species richness, followed by insects or the caterpillar density, and then followed by bird density. So it is a function of deer density because they're structuring the forest in certain ways that allows fewer trees to survive, and the diversity goes down, and that affects the entire food web. And if you think about forests that are developing over many, many decades, hundreds of years, this effect that starting at some point when forests are regenerating, that will be with this signal will be in the forest for many, many decades. And that experiment needed to be terminated because at the high deer densities, people get into issues of deer health. And as you all know, there's always trees falling in the forest. If you have an exclosure where you don't allow deer access and the tree falls onto the fence, deer are not immediately trying to jump in. But if you cage deer in conditions that are not really very appreciated by them and the tree falls, they're immediately out. So they couldn't maintain the high densities, and this entire experiment was scrapped. But the typical densities that we have is kind of in the middle panel here: 24 deer per square kilometer, 60 deer per square mile. That's a pretty typical density that we see in many areas. One of the communities outside of Cornell here, just immediately adjacent to that, has 125 deer per square mile. You can only imagine, well, I can more than imagine, I can see what the effects are. So we have these results. There are thousands of studies that have done something. So we got into the entire situation because we started to think about the combined effect of how are deer interacting with other organisms. And we were particularly interested in other so-called drivers of ecosystem change. And here are 2 things that are important. And we looked at earthworms, at least in the Northeast and much of the Midwest, except in prairies. Earthworms are all introduced from Europe and Asia. We have about a dozen to 18 different species here in the Northeast. One has to go as far south as Georgia or the Carolinas to find native earthworms. Some of them are now being transported back north with horticultural plants, but these earthworms are all invasive. And I will show you some of the effects that there are. In invasive plants, all of you have dealt with them in one way or the other. As I said earlier, these things are interacting with each other. Their effect may be additive or they may facilitate each other. We didn't really know, and so we started to think about that, and I will show you how we did that, and that will contribute to the knowledge that we gained there. So not only were we interested in trying to understand what these effects are of these individual stressors on some rare and endangered plant species, that was our focus. We also wanted to understand whether there is some kind of an interaction network. Do earthworms affect deer? Do deer affect earthworms? We knew that earthworms eat deer pellets, so they can build up larger populations, but what's the interaction between earthworms and invasive plants? We had done some work early on that seemed to suggest that for some species that we worked with, that the earthworms were first and then the invasive plants were second. But so there's another interaction network that we try to work with, and we did this by creating exclosure networks. And an exclosure here means that we have fences that we erect in the forest. These are all forest locations to exclude deer. We call these no longer deer exclusion effects because they are fence effects, as I will explain them. We did a number of different abbreviations don't mean anything to you, but it doesn't matter. We have them in the Hudson River, closer to New York City, and then around Ithaca. Those are the three circles that you kind of see here in the middle. And we have different size of the exclosures. We started with 30 by 30 meters at West Point because we did a whole bunch of experiments. We realized that for a lot of the things that we wanted to study, 30 by 30 meters was too small. We increased the sizes, and the latest ones are actually 5 acres or 2 hectare large exclosures, and that's still too small if we wanted to understand effects on birds or on some mammal communities. The typical small exclosures that botanists have put up, 10 by 10 meters or so, they usually are plagued by too many edge effects. So we try to encourage larger exclosures because it allows to capture the effects that we have better. We'll get to the Lyme disease later. So what we do, how our situations look like, is pretty much just, as you can see it on the slide. There are fences in the woods. We do not have them professionally installed like the slide here on the right. We now bolt them to trees and have cable running through that. There is an entire webinar that I could give on how to install these. But the costs are about $1 a running foot. If you do it with students or volunteers, and they hold up really, really well with the plastic netting. Plastic netting can also very easily be repaired with just a couple of clippers and scissors and some hog rings. And you don't need big equipment in the woods. Big equipment always brings earthworms and disturbances into the woods, and we try to avoid that. What we do, though, is work with individually marked plants, and I hope you can see my cursor down here. Plants are labeled with numbers so we can go back and revisit them. We mark plants in open and in fence plots. If they are not existing there, we actually bring them in as seeds and seedlings. I will show some of those as well. And then we record over a longer term whether they're surviving, whether they're flowering, how they're growing, and then how they're reproducing over time. And I'm going to go into, yes, it would be possible to create an exclosure big enough to measure effects on birds, but you need to be really, really big because you like to have multiple territories. And that's one of the questions that was just floating by. I'm going to go into the effects of the earthworm first. This is work that was done by my graduate student, Annis Dobson. Most of the work that you're seeing here is actually available in papers, and I can share those with you if you're interested. You can just send me an email, and I will share PDFs with you. So earthworms, gardeners very often consider earthworms to be beneficial for plant growth. What Annis did, we created deer exclosures, we planted a whole bunch. These are 15 that I'm showing here, native plant species as seedlings And we have earthworm dry biomass. We extract earthworms out of the soil using a muster technique, and that's on the x-axis here. And what you see is that with a few exceptions, most slopes go downward as earthworm biomass increases. So the translation of that is seedlings of these species that you have here do not benefit from earthworms. There's not a single species that benefits from earthworms, even though we have a couple of sedges in here, or sedge and at least the grass. Most of them decline. The survival rate of seedlings, if they grow with high earthworm densities, will declining. Some of them don't seem to be affected like cohosh here. So very, very surprising. Some of the things that we're seeing is that some of the individuals that are surviving may become bigger. We're still working on these things, but overall, seedling recruitment is suppressed by earthworms, an effect that we early on did not anticipate, and that's for native species in the forestry setting. When we did our exclosures at West Point, we anticipated that within a few years we would see a change in the community, in the vegetation community. We did not see that, and this is depicted in this slide here. Whether it's species richness, upper left hand, whether it's the height of the vegetation, the litter volume, or vegetation cover. You can see that the fenced plots here are always the filled squares, and the deer accessible ones are the open circles. And the community did not change. Individual species responded differently. So this is a cautionary tale for those of you that are trying to demonstrate that deer would have an effect. You can think about somewhere in a suburban area or a forest that you're managing, and I think the deer are important as structuring forces. You put up a fence, and 5 years later, not much has changed. And that's because if you had deer in an area for a very long time, at high abundance, only those species that can actually survive under those conditions will continue to exist and grow. So that's what we're facing at West Point, many decades of high deer abundance, and there was no change in the community. That may take decades to see an effect, and you cannot then accept that there's no change or no difference between inside and outside after 5 years. That deer are not the drivers of the deteriorated situation that you're facing. I will show you some ways of assessing that better. I'm happy to share the protocols of how we're doing that with you. We're working on some papers to outline that more, but we have existing protocols that I'm happy to share. What did change, though, and here is the interaction with the invasive plants. We looked at 3 different species that are really considered major forest invaders: garlic mustard, barberry, and Japanese stiltgrass. Now, all of you will have stiltgrass in the area because it's just a species that's coming up from the south. It is in New York, it's in New England, and I believe it's in as far west as Illinois now, at least in southern Illinois. And we didn't do anything in terms of manipulation of the introduced plants other than putting a fence up. So that excluded the deer. You will see there is another little twist to the story, and this is the percent cover. You see that for garlic mustard, the top line here, when we started, the cover of garlic mustard was already very, very low. I don't have the time to go into this, but if you don't do anything to garlic mustard, it will disappear in 5 to 10 years. I think I did another webinar where I went into some details. So we're just in the process of publishing these data. Garlic mustard disappears. It's a self-poisoning thing, negative soil feedback. I don't have the time to go into that one. But if you put up fences, that decline happens even faster. For barberry, there doesn't seem to be a change. Now, barberry is a shrub, but what we did, and I don't have the slides to show it for you, we looked at the annual growth rates because it's a woody species, so you can cut slices out of it. And what we found was that barberry growth rates decreased on the inside of the fences while it stayed compared to the outside. So if you exclude deer, barberry will grow slower, and it doesn't disappear. We haven't had the time to look at that in over a decade or so. But there's an effect that deer have on barberry. Deer there, barberry is favored. The strongest effect that we saw, you can also see in this lower panel that these effects actually increase over time. We just put a fence up, and Microstegium, and Japanese field grass, declines are very, very low just because the deer were taken out of the system. So if you want to manage invasive plants, at least taking out the deer out of the system, reducing the abundance greatly, will really help you to a great extent. I always say there's not any legislation assessing deer abundance anywhere in the U.S. relate focus on big plans, moving plans to address deer abundance.
Hey, Bernd?
Yes.
There's some sound issues going on. I'm not sure what's happening. Did you change anything?
I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything?
No.
So it seems also voice here.
So it sounds like both are. So is there echo on my sound or just Bernd's?
I'm talking again. Is there a problem with my sound?
Yeah. So yours is reverberating and breaking up. Well, so if you didn't, do you want to? I'm just trying to think how to resolve this. I guess one option, you want to come down to my office and you can sit here and present.
I can obviously do that. Echoes for me.
Yeah, I mean it's like to the point we can't almost can't hear what you're saying.
Okay, well that's not good then.
Right. So why don't you come down here and I'll let you sit here.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there. All right. Okay. Give us 2 minutes, folks.
Yeah.
So, Bernd, mute your microphone.
Yeah.
All the problems.
Okay, so this is not Peter talking, but it's Bernd talking. Sorry for that. It was a brand new microphone that Peter sent me. When did my sound break down? So maybe I start over with the slide. In the middle of barberry, okay. So let me write, okay. So for barberry, which is obviously a shrub, we measured the annual growth rate, and by just taking slices out of barberry and getting them down to the dendrochronology lab here at Cornell University, and then we're looking at the annual growth rates. And what we could see was that where deer were present, barberry was growing faster than where we had excluded deer. That doesn't necessarily result in a decline in terms of the barberry populations. That may take a long time, maybe several decades or so, but at least deer were positively influencing barberry growth. The strongest results that we could demonstrate over the 4 years that we were actually working on it, or 5 years, was on Japanese fieldgrass. And there you can see that it took a while for this effect to manifest itself. So short-term experiments very often do not give us the long-term demographic effects that we're seeing here. Microstegium oleo is an annual, and it grows down to very, very low levels. And we didn't do anything other than really putting fences up, and everything else was left to the organisms that were there. Okay, so now I'm sitting at a different computer and I need to okay. So let's see whether this works. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. Okay, there we go. So I have just talked about the invasive plants and how. Are you guys able to see the slides? The Trillium adult slides? Okay, good. Thank you very much. So while we had deer exclusion negatively affect plant invader, deer exclusion benefited native plants. Trillium erectum here, red flowering trillium, was one of the focal species that we were looking at. And again, it took a while for the effects to manifest themselves. But we saw more plants with multiple stems and fence plots. Usually you would see trilliums under high deer herbivory either not flowering at all or having maximum one stem. Plant height and leaf size were also higher in the fenced area, and that effect was increasing over time. But not only, I'm trying to work with Peter's mouse here. There we go. The most important thing, though, was the plants that were on the inside of the exclosures actually produced a much larger number of seeds. If you think about future generations, this is really the effect that we want to have. Not only are the plants bigger, surviving longer, but they're also producing more seeds. So that means that populations will be growing over time. There's also surprisingly less fruit herbivory, and that seems the fruit herbivory is largely done by rodents, chipmunks, and mice, and so somehow that was affected as well. The benefits that we wanted for the native vegetation were materializing here for the individual species that we were looking at. But over time, there were more ecological surprises. So what I have here is the fencing effect on earthworm abundance. So we had some indication that earthworms seem to be declining at West Point over time after we created our exclosures. We had an undergrad do a large-scale survey in Pennsylvania and in New York, looking at deer exclosures and sampling earthworms on the inside and the outside. And we had deer exclosures that were between 5 to 20 years old. And so what the graph depicts here really is that the older these exclosures are, the larger the decrease in the earthworm abundance is in these fence plots. Again, smaller units that you would fence will not show this effect. Some of these exclosures were pretty large. So we tried to start with 30 by 30 meter ones and then up. So earthworms and fence plots decrease over time. That will have an impact on plant growth. And so another ecological surprise. Again, these things are published in ecosystems. I can share the papers with you on that one. So I talked about that plant community didn't really give us something in terms of deer effects. So what we now try to do, and deer numbers don't give us anything either, because it's not really the number of deer that we are interested in, but we are interested in the effects of deer. Deer in the Adirondacks, with much lower productivity, longer winters, need to be very different to favor good native ecosystems compared to something in Illinois or so, where productivity is so much higher, much better soils. So we wanted a new assessment tool. Also, if you think about many suburban parks or so, there's almost nothing in the understory, maybe with the exception of some invasive plants. So we recommend use of native Sentinel plants if they are existing and number them so you can actually go back and see whether they continue to exist. Or we use deliberate planting into different backgrounds. And I'm going to show you one example that we have used here. The benefit of that is that you have a direct assessment of a potential impact. And the idea that many of these stressors that we have, whether it's nutrient deposition, whether it's any other disturbance, would be a major impact factor, can be excluded if you put plants directly there and say, oh, they can grow here. Many gardeners will say, hey, I can grow almost anything if you give it a little TLC. And that may be the same for many deteriorated habitats that we have in urban and suburban area. It's an easy methodology, suitable for volunteer participation if you miss some guidance. And as I said, skin species occupy habitats that are appear deteriorated and have a good function for conservation. That would be another benefit. This is what it typically looks like. We use red oak seedlings. We use red oaks because we can store them in a refrigerator over the winter. We can easily grow them, and they're somehow intermediate in terms of the deer preference. Oaks are desirable species in forests, so we plant them out into areas that look like they have suffered from high deer herbivory. And we, in our early experiments, we fenced some. We didn't do others. If you don't fence them, Pete, can you give me your pointer here? Quick start. This one. Okay. This one. Okay. So you, so in the upper left hand, I have to click. So you can see on here that this oak obviously has been browsed. It's not completely eaten, but it has been browsed. You see the numbered tags. Similar age oak in a cage looks much happier. So let's see what I can actually advance this. And here are just some data from the areas around Ithaca where we have worked. So here are the Leopold Woods. This is not all those woods, but it's one of his sons lived in Ithaca, and we kind of hashed this out together on his porch. And you can see if you fence the oaks, and that's on this side here, there's almost no mortality. There's one that died, but within a month of planting, and we plant usually like in late May, early June, the individuals that we planted are completely eaten. And that would not be something that you would assess if you use a typical woody browse index or other assessment methods for deer browse. The recruiting oaks will be eaten, and you're not going to find the little stems. Sometimes we have difficulties, even though we know that there's a tag there, and we can go back to that. There's the lower slide is showing just a different habitat. So the species are disappearing very quickly, the individuals that we planted. And sometimes it's really difficult to show people what deer do. You have a beautiful white trillium meadow here where you have the deer inset there. And below that, you see a sea of flags. It's really difficult to show things that are not there. And so what I did here, I wandered through this area and put a flag at every trillium that was eaten. So every flag represents a white flowering trillium that was eaten by a deer. You can almost see the path that individual deer or a little deer group took through that area, munching left and right. On the right-hand side, you can see a lovely ginseng, and here I'm not sure how well you can see it, but the tip is browsed. The flowers are still there, but the tip is browsed. I have walked with ecologists through areas that were devastated, and they said, can you show me how deer browse looks like? I said, you just need to look down. And we have things at our disposal here where we can actually put trail cams up, and we can, oops, now I need to run this, Peter. Can you help me? You don't know what this is going to work. Okay. So this is supposedly a video. And we didn't test this one. So I need to explain that to you, what is actually happening here. So we have a trail cam. We have a number of planted oaks here that we have here. And if that video would run, you would see this single doe just moving through from one plant to the other, and out of the 10 oaks that we planted, 8 were eaten. It's much better when you see it in video, so I apologize. Maybe we fix it for the evening audience. We'll see what happens. Sorry for that. So we seem to be having something that was interesting as a tool to understand the impacts. We then did this on almost a county basis. So what you're looking at is an aerial of Tompkins County with Ithaca in the middle here. That's Ithaca. We're sitting up on a hill somewhere around here. Each of these pins represents a site where we planted individual oaks. They're reflected as Cornell sites, Village of Lansing sites. There were state parks involved in that. The Finger Lakes Land Trust had allowed us to do some assessments, and we had some individual landowners. I believe these are something like 40 sites where we did our Oak Sentinel assessments. So that allowed us to look at a larger spatial scale. And this is what we found. So here it is the browse rate now. It's no longer the survival, but it's the browse rate. And you can see in the area of Cayuga Heights, I talked about their deer abundance before, the browse rate was over 70%, and it kind of goes down. These are Cornell lands, Finger Lakes Land Trust here, state parks. This is the large deer exclosures that we did. This is the property where I live, where deer are under constant threat by bows and guns. And so we can drop this down to something that may be acceptable. I put a line here. This one represents a browse rate of 15%. We know that for white trillium, which is depicted here, a browse rate of 15% of the flowering individuals will result in a population decline over time and a disappearance of the population. That's a pretty low browse rate. With a 15% browse rate for an oak is actually acceptable. I'm not entirely sure, because it may take a decade or longer for an oak to get out of the reach of the hungry deer mouths. But I just put it in as a reflection. There's not a good model for oak regeneration out there as of yet. They do grow in the woods under a tree canopy, but really slowly, about a centimeter a year or so, at least early on. So this is entirely unacceptable. Obviously, for a county with this deer browse rate, there will be very little, if at all, oak regeneration in Tompkins County under the current deer abundance that we have in Tompkins County. So then the communities that are facing the high deer abundance, in the usual way, because they are governed differently, they all respond differently. Cayuga Heights, the community outside of Cornell, allowed no hunting, had a protracted fight with the deer rights group called cayugadeer.org. You should actually take a look at that to just know what people are up to. They did sterilization and many tens of thousands of dollars. Then the deer population didn't decline quickly enough, so they hired the same contractor using crossbows, started in spring 2015, and so the deer are now being shot in Cayuga Heights, and that had just continued this spring again. But the implementation of lethal methods was really delayed by almost 10 years. The deer right activists lost every court battle, but at least they could continue to fight in court for a while. The Village of Lansing, where I have coordinated a bow hunting program since 2007, switched to the nuisance approach, and I will explain what a nuisance approach is in a moment. Cornell University in 2006 or so, or 7, created an integrated deer research and management program, and we started with sterilization in the core zone around Cornell, did hunting in the outlying areas that were between 6,000 and 10,000 acres that was actually part of the university lands. And since 2013 onwards, at least in the core campus area, we used the nuisance permits. The village of Trumansburg, where no hunting was allowed since the 70s, switched to immediate implementation of nuisance permits in 2014. I will go into the results of that in a moment. The areas around Cornell have regulated hunting that is allowed by a state management agency, plus DMFA, and that stands for Deer Management Focus Area. That was implemented 4 years ago. because of the complaints that were received here. And what that did was it allowed individual hunters to print tags for themselves, and each individual hunter was allowed 2 antlerless deer per day in the regular season, which usually runs from October 1st to somewhere a few days before Christmas. And it was a special season was created at the last 3 weeks in January for antlerless deer only, and again, the bag limit was 2 deer per hunter per day. Some of the hunting organizations were thinking that we would wipe out deer in Tompkins County. I invite you to come and visit. There are still plenty of them here. We implemented in many of these places our oak sentinel approach, and we also went into tick abundance as one of the things that people were concerned about, particularly Lyme disease. So Cornell articulated management goals early on before creating the program. It was a reduction that was anticipated or desirable by 70%. It included the ecological damage in natural areas, the health threats to staff and students about Lyme disease, damage to agricultural research plots, and damage to ornamental plantings. Again, the goal was 70% reduction, and we wanted an increase in forest regeneration and population growth rates of native plants. And then the other goal was to develop appropriate indicators to assess success of our measures. Early on, Cornell implemented a doe sterilization, and over 90% of the does were sterilized using initial tubal ligation and then later on ovariectomy. There was an encouragement of the antlerless kill through EAB, stands for earn a buck, not emerald ash borer, and deer management assistant permits. Early on, the different farms at Cornell all ran their own program that was unified under an access program, included Cornell plantations. We had between 500 and 1,000 participants per year, as I said, on 6,000 to 10,000 acres. And there was a deer management focus area that included a lot of Cornell property. The results were rather disappointing. Despite large efforts by our hunters, there was no population reductions and no damage reductions. We had the does that were sterilized were marked with ear tags, and a number of them also got collars, so we could follow where their whereabouts during the days and seasons. Over time, cars killed more deer than hunters, so that's not a very good. Well, it's very good marksmanship by the people that were drivers, but not necessarily by the hunters. It was very surprising to us, but nevertheless, that's a reflection of reality out there. We implemented the oak Sentinel approach in the areas at Cornell. And Cornell was divided into three zones. There was a sterilization zone here where those were captured, sterilized, and then released. We had a hunting zone where we allowed people access to hunt deer, no sterilization. And we had a control zone where those were darted but not sterilized. They were given ear tags and occasionally collars. And so we implemented our Oak Sentinel approach in these different areas and multiple locations. And what you can see here is the survival rate of the Oak Sentinels. The Oak Sentinel, and it didn't matter if you had them in cages, the survival rates were around 80%. That's pretty good. Where deer had access to them, the survival rates were 30% or lower. So after about $500,000 for sterilization and the research program, there was really no difference in what we were able to achieve through hunting or sterilization. There was no ecological benefit that we had, and that was not acceptable to us here at Cornell. So what you see here now early on is we use camera surveys of our marked does always in the spring to understand what the population is around campus. And this is the number of deer that we have on campus. It hovers around 100 or so. Maybe there was even a slight increase that you can see by 2013. We didn't see any ecological recovery, and then we implemented what I call our nuisance approach, and I will go into those details. And for the first time since inception of the program, we actually see a decline in the number of deer on campus, and that decline is continuing. We are working on this year's, but with a really weird winter, and we're not quite sure where we're at. And the lack of a reduction here on campus is despite the lack of births on campus. So the does were all sterilized. There was no fawning that was happening, but the does are surviving longer because they don't need to raise fawns or lactate over the season. So we really didn't make a difference. DDP is what is officially called in New York deer depredation permits. And that's what we call, they're also known as nuisance permits. There may be some states that don't have this. There may be other states where it's called differently. In New York, it's called deer depredation permits. And I'm showing you how we implemented them. The core components of what we did is, in New York, it's not legal to bait deer, but we put out bait. This draws deer to the best and safest locations. We're working in a suburban area. That allows us to have safe shots that are broadside at close range, 20 to 30 yards. We're talking about Cornell here right now, is bows and crossbows. We do not allow guns close to campus. But in other areas that may be possible. These are volunteers, or sometimes there are professionals, like in Cayuga Heights, White Buffalo. You can hire sharpshooters. Shooting does include areas or times at night where it was very highly successful. We use lights to illuminate deer. In New York, it is allowed to shoot until 11 p.m. We take bucks and does because both of them eat. And overall impact reduction is the desirable effect. And we have extended operational times, not just the hunting season. So that's really important to allow individuals to be out there for longer periods. We use a website tracking of activities and deer take, and again, this video down in the lower right-hand corner will not run. We may see that at night. We have activity and resting periods. A hunter once said to me, can there be too much hunting? And absolutely it can. We try to limit it to once or maybe 2 times a week that people are out there. Because deer are very smart, and they get to know the hunter activities very quickly, and they will avoid tree stands where hunters are sitting. We use barriers to guide deer movement. That's kind of what you see down here. You see the individual deer in the background coming in. We put some brush out. You see corn in the forefront here. That individual deer will come in from the left and walk broadside, and so you can take a very safe shot once the deer is stationary. We have text communication among participants so people can help each other. The venison is being donated to food banks or to churches, and we use tracking of deer activity with the typical trail camps that are now available. That allows us to maximize the time efficiency that we're out there. So we're only out there when the deer are out there. We're not going to places where the deer are not active. This is what it would look like. This is just a suburban area where you see a brush pile that guides the deer movement. We use automated feeders now because if you operate for a long period of time, even though a hunter always say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to bait, they're not going out and baiting every single day because they have other things on their agenda as well. Using a feeder allows us to dispense bait with baiting once a week. We have things where we have blinds up there and you can't really see it. This is a tree stand in there. We have multiple tree stands occasionally at locations because the deer are smarting up very quickly. Early on, we actually have multiple piles here to get the deer used to the feeders. That only takes about a week or so, and then they're eating right out of the spinner here. That's possible, so they're not deterred by it. The lower one here looks is the view from a tree stand. That feeder is about 20 yards away. And what happens, this is a year before, but the deer are being attracted to the bait. Here you can have smaller groups. This one maybe like a dozen individuals that are coming to the lawn to feed. We have a very small group of select participants that we are familiar with. We have a small number of shooting locations, and we operate usually sometimes from September to the end of March or even into April last year. We train participants and do that, and we have a code of conduct document that we develop so people can actually follow the outlined procedures. That differs a little bit depending on where you are and what different municipalities are wanting to do. So here are some of the accomplishments. At Cornell, the first year that we did that, we did a trial area before to show our senior administration that we could safely do it without shooting students. We had 60 participants, but only 10 went out. We had 9 shooting locations, but took 34 deer. That was quite a number. That resulted in a 43% deer population reduction in 2014. The year after that, we had 18 participants, and again, only 15 went out. We increased the shooting locations to 20. We took 37 deer, and we had now a 53% deer reduction. So we needed to shoot 37 deer to get a 10% deer reduction on campus. So we're suffering from an influx from the deer in the surrounding areas. That's why ultimately this needs to happen at a landscape level. So right now the town and the city of Ithaca, they're producing plenty of deer that venture onto the Cornell campus, and we have to take them if we don't want their effects to materialize on campus. But here's a really important aspect: 3 to 8 hours of effort per deer taken in the DDP or the nuisance approach. Our hunters put 50 to 80 hours in a regular hunting program. So this is an incredible reduction in effort, and people are reasonably happy with what we are doing, and that they are able to take deer without sitting in the tree stands in January for hours at a time without doing anything. In Trumansburg, which just based on our recommendations of the outcome that we had here at Cornell, we said, don't even allow hunting early on. You will just scare the deer and they will become skittish. We did the nuisance approach immediately. We had 11 participants, 9 shooting locations, and we worked with an ownership model so that an individual or a group of individuals was responsible for baiting and shooting at a location. That also allowed the individual landowner to develop a relationship with their particular hunter, or we call them participants then. So instead of having a landowner opening their property for whoever wants to come there, it was a very close relationship that helped us gain access to a number of properties. 91 deer were taken between mid-September and the end of March. Trumansburg officials estimated that they had about 100 deer in the 1 square mile area. So we took 91 deer, over 1,000 pounds of venison were needed to food banks, and we only did this on weekends and in the evenings. That was our limitation that we put on ourselves. We had a highly supportive community. There was some individual opposition, but only in the first year when it was discussed. And it was 2 to 3 hours of effort per deer taken. So this was very successful, at least in the first year. So what you see here, this dark boundary is the village of Trumansburg. You can see the different roads through there. What you may not be able to see very well, you have a number of black dots here, individuals here. There's a number of them here. These are individual deer or deer groups. There was an aerial survey conducted at night with infrared, April 2015. I told you before, Trumansburg estimated to have 100 deer in the area that's outlined here. That's a 1 square mile. But on April 1st, within the village, we had 44, and right outside the village were 87. So we don't know who the real residents are, whether, for example, this group of deer here is always outside or comes back to seek refuge in the village. But the job is clearly not done. It became much more difficult the last season, and we're at about 30 now for the season that are still ongoing. So it's not a one-shot event or multiple shot events or 1 year event that needs to continue for quite a while. And I don't think you can ever take the program completely off the books, because the deer will respond very quickly. In Lansing, We implemented the deer nuisance approach here in 2015, but this is what you can see what was happening during the regular season over the years. We increased the deer take here from 11 the first season to the second, and we got up to 65 deer. That was because we increased the number of participating landowners. We have never lost the landowners that allowed us hunting on their property. The deer management focus area came into being in 2012. It was successful early on, but then the success rate dropped down to 0 here after 2 years. We do not understand exactly what's happening there, whether the deer are too smart by January or so, but this 0 is not a reflection of lack of hunting effort. And then we came in with the nuisance approach, and we're still working on it. So this seems to work really, really well. The village says that deer vehicle collisions increased from 1 per week to 1 per month, so that's a substantial reduction. And we have about 20 to 30 hunters or participants in that. Okay. We're almost done with what the time that we have here. So the implementation challenges that we have is we are relying entirely on volunteers. What are their rewards? Why do they continue to go out there? And it's very few people shoot the majority of the deer. If you think about it, you have a period from September to March. How often do people go out there? 20, 30, 40 times? Once they have shot 10 deer, are they continuing to go out? There's no reward that we can offer them under current legislation. The consistent baiting was an issue. Maintaining the participation. We use tracking dogs because occasionally you don't find the deer that you just shot. We know that the distance that deer run, we keep track of that, is approximately 50 yards. That's a bow or crossbow shot. Goes up to 150, but we use tracking dogs if we can't find the deer. There's deer education. The dumb ones are in the freezer early on, but the surviving ones are more important than the killed ones. So we do not engage large groups more than 5. We develop alternative strategies, and the work is clearly not done in the season. And so our definition of success is really important. We don't go by deer numbers, but we go by other things that deer would affect, whether that's oak survival, plant and animal populations, number of ticks and Lyme disease. I don't have the time to go into the Lyme disease stuff right now, but last year's work in Connecticut that was published clearly shows that the deer are the driving factors. The same has been shown in in Indiana now. Number of deer vehicle collisions. Social acceptance is maybe something that can be used in combination of that. What's inappropriate really is the number of deer per area, unless it's linked directly to the appropriate ones. The number of deer killed is not important, or the sterilized or observed ones. It's a number that are still out there. Hunter satisfaction may be part of the overall assessment, but hunter satisfaction will plummet as you see fewer deer. That's kind of what we know. Plant community composition is not really something that is useful early on. Let me go. There's no rush? Okay. All right, so let me go back to that one. And so the core program components for this is really the problem articulation. Again, do the deer impacts, not the deer numbers, if you wish to engage in a program like that. It's important to do the assessments. What's the baseline? What's the impact that the deer are having? Then choose any remedy you wish to choose. We recommend the deer depredation permits, and we also recommend regulated market hunting. Again, that's a topic that we can't go into that one right now. It's not allowed under current legislation anywhere in the U.S. But it may mean that we have to give individual hunters the opportunity to market the game that they're shooting here, white-tailed deer. That should be regulated, though. If you choose anything, whether you're going to go to sterilization or hunting or something else, assess what are you actually getting to what you want to get to. If you don't, choose a different management approach. I'm not saying you should do this or that. I just recommend something that we feel is a way forward. Whether with what we have implemented here, we will get down to the numbers that we need to, and the reduction in the impact, we will see. We're working on it. choose the criteria or indicators that you want to measure carefully. In places where deer have eliminated most vegetation, you want to do something different. In places where you still have something useful and you have plants that you can mark and go back and monitor, that is something useful as well. Maybe you do a mix of these. There's no quick fix. Make sure that you do the reporting, because people will hold you accountable, or should hold you accountable, as you are recommending certain ways to go about deer management. As I said, evaluate the chosen remedy and change if necessary. So our recommendations then are that everybody should lobby lawmakers and agencies for more aggressive deer management and for changes in approaches. We've gotten into the mess that we're in right now because nobody has evaluated really what is happening in the woods or in suburbia in any quantitative way. We need more implements, more days, more licenses. I always see hunters duke it out. Should you use bows? Should you use crossbows? Should you use guns and whatever? And everybody hates that somebody else is using something different, spends different time in the woods. That's just not very helpful. And we need to hunt smarter, not harder. Very often we have seen that fewer people are better. We had last year 800 hunters on 6,000 acres, and 50 deer were harvested at the beginning of the deer management focus area season. So that means 750 people came out of the woods without a deer. Even more than that, because some hunters shot more than the deer. And of course we heard, you don't have any deer on Cornell lands. That is not a deer problem. Well, we know better. We need to hunt smarter, not harder. We need to articulate and assess deer impacts using ecological criteria. Deer numbers are not reliable or transferable. Continue the assessment and monitor the success. I just talked about that. And regulated commercial hunting may be the only real viable option if we're serious at the landscape level. But we need to enable communities to actually do the right thing. And the nuisance approach, or deer depredation permit approach that we have at our disposal in New York, may not exist in every state. So to go back to Aldo, what I'm recommending as the implementation of the land ethic is FSR, fence, shoot, and restore. What we need to do until deer populations are at acceptable level, we need to fence the high value populations that we have, because those are the seed sources for the future generations, whether that's for trees or whether that's for herbaceous plants. The reproductive individuals create seed sources. I'm not talking about hundreds of hectares that need to be fenced, but there are populations that we want to safeguard. The shooting is clear. I talked about that. We need to change in the hunting cultures, both at the individuals and at the agencies, to make it a conservation culture that's not just focused on individual species. And then the restoration is an other part. Lots of places, once deer numbers are at acceptable level, will be able to harbor very diverse and wonderful plant community and animal communities that depend on the plant communities. If the deer numbers are down, it will be native plants and animals, and the introduced ones will go down. Maybe not every single species, but deer are the drivers together with the earthworms. Deterioration is reversible, as fencing is showing us, but we cannot fence everything, and we shouldn't, because fences are excluding all kinds of other things. While burrowing animals and coyotes and others can climb underneath fences while the deer are still being kept out, you can also see there's a nice deer trail right here. So we're creating these edge effects on the outside as well. But the deterioration is reversible if we're serious about it. And in the end, the choice is ours. So we can have landscapes like this one. That's actually in New York City, where there are no deer, and at least not in Manhattan, although they're coming. And there's no Lyme disease in Manhattan because there are no deer in Manhattan. And I prefer the landscapes here on the left with beautiful trilliums and abundance of native birds. And yes, there is an occasional deer in the landscape versus the ones on the right. This is the Leopold Woods, as they were looking like when they were coming here to Ithaca. was beautiful trillium still there. There's none to be found. Or we get into these invasive thickets of honeysuckle and buckthorn, and plenty of deer that can hide out in them. As I said, the choice is ours. That's what I have to say. There's many more things. I can give 3 other webinars about details of that, but I will end it here for now. And I'm sure that there is a number of questions that I can address, and I will see whether I can actually focus on some of the chat items. Thank you very much. So, okay, so I see a question here about white-footed mice and Lyme disease. Let me just go back to... So the study in Connecticut didn't look at white-footed mice, and I can share these studies with you. White-footed mice are clearly part of the system, but they don't drive the system. They harbor the borreliosis, and the ticks need to feed on that to be infested in the first place. But if we drive deer population down to very low levels, in Connecticut it was done at it's a threshold level of 10 deer per square mile, then the tick populations plummet, the infection rates in the ticks plummet, and the reported Lyme disease instances in the individuals, that's a study that was done in Mumford Cove in Connecticut, plummets as well. People there did assess all these different components, but they didn't assess the white-footed mice. So white-footed mice would be the driver of the population dynamics of the ticks. We would see the ups and downs of the white-footed mice with outbreaks and others. We don't see that. So in the end, we seem to get increasing evidence that the deer are the drivers. And hunting has never been able to affect it because hunting is not able to drive deer populations down to 10 per square mile. So that's the situation. There's more to be said about that, but let's see. Do deer eat the pink lady slippers? They do occasionally browse it. We have a study going on my own property where we monitor them. The interesting thing, and I haven't really put an emphasis on that one, we see a number of what we call non-consumptive effects. When you think about the decline in the invasive plant species as you're taking the deer out, it's a non-consumptive effect. And for lady slippers and for some others, what we're seeing is that eliminating deer access to areas where these species grow, they grow bigger, they're producing more flowers, and they may be being up and not dormant more often. We see the same for white trilliums, and I haven't focused on white trilliums here. So the deer are affecting the pink lady slippers as they're affecting a whole bunch of other orchids, but it is both a consumptive and a non-consumptive effect. Okay, here's even a person saying about the pink and yellow lady slippers have been browsed. Okay, so let's see. So the red oak planting density with protective cages. So we used the cages early on because we wanted to make sure that it's indeed the deer that are doing the damage. What you will see, and we use 20 seedlings in cages, 20 outside, but this is an area of, let's say, 5 acres that we are assessing. If you have larger areas, you need to create multiple of these planting populations. We now no longer use the protective cages for the simple reason that we have convinced ourselves that we are, one, able to understand, one, it's a rodent that takes down an oak seedling because of the angle cut, or whether it's a deer that does that. And in all the places that we ever put an oak will grow. So we are no longer in the need to justify the protective cage to see whether the different areas will actually indeed be able to grow an oak. If you have more time, if you have more resources, if you have more volunteers, increase the number of oaks that you plant. But this is just something that we started with, and gives us enough statistical power to actually say something about it. Okay. Info about garlic mustard being self-limiting. Send me an email and I will send you something. We have a little extension brochure that we have created, and the big population hopefully is coming out soon. Deer and earthworms on swallowwort. Interesting. So there is some suspicion. Earthworms, nobody has really looked into the situation, but I believe swallowwort only occurs where there are earthworms. Garlic mustard only occurs where there are earthworms. Otherwise, they can't colonize that. But I have no data to actually show that to you. In the places that I know where swallowwort is a high abundance of deer as well. But as I said, I do not know of a study that has looked at that in detail. Yeah, so this is going back to the Carey Institute with white-footed mice. Again, I can't go into this one very often. It's a modeling study that doesn't seem to hold up to the newest evidence. Okay, so here somebody is worried about the genetic effect on the deer population. So I have a joking response to that. We are thinning out the dumb ones, so that should benefit the smart ones. I'm not sure that that's the desired effect. The gene pool of the residual deer population, most likely not, because we're not going to go down to levels where you would create a genetic bottleneck. And in deer, it's the males, the one-year-old males, or in their first spring, that go long distances to find new territories. That will be enough to prevent any negative effects. So the bow hunters use either conventional bows or crossbows. That's up to the participants, and occasionally it's up to the different municipalities. The village of Cayuga Heights will not allow any regular bow, only crossbows. The village of Lansing will not allow any crossbows and only regular bows. There is no rhyme or reason for one or the other. It's just the preference of the communities, it's the preference of the individuals. I personally prefer a regular bow because I can get multiple shots off much quicker than I can with the current version of crossbows. There was a question early on about wolves and predators. So the hope that predators will limit deer population at the current density is unfortunately a lost cause. We looked at that in places where wolves are just more or less at the number, and I believe, if I remember my data correctly, and this is from Wisconsin, there are 800 deer for every wolf in Wisconsin, and those wolves will never be able to control the deer population through consumptive effects. That's not possible, even if you put in bears and mountain lions as additional predators, and then maybe once the coyotes really learn to hunt deer and not just eat roadkill, then there may be something that's happening. But there's another effect that predators have. Predators move individuals on the countryside. That's not necessarily happening for coyotes, because those of you that run trail cams under apple trees we'll see that coyotes come in and then the deer come in, or vice versa, and they go to the same apple tree. And so coyotes are not excluding deer from any places. They will predate on fawns. The bears are much more important as deer predators. But the wolves and other predators may move deer around, or the usual prey species. That's something that we're seeing. But deer not being able to hang out in their preferred habitats, the habitats may not be deteriorating as quickly. So just moving around the individual prey items or the prey individuals here, deer, will be a beneficial effect. The second is an effect that we call the landscape of fear. So deer that are existing without predators can focus all their energy and calories on producing babies and don't need to be alert all the time. Once they are needing to be alert, their fertility rates will go down. So that's a beneficial effect that predators have. But hold no hopes that release of wolves or return of the wolves will be the golden bullet for deer management in much of the Northeast, even if we were to allow that. That would be a very long-term effect. It's still in our hands for now. Was the browse rate determined from the experiment planted seeding? Absolutely. That's what we did. The oak exclosure is about 1 to 2 feet tall, depends on how long you would like to create those. You want to make sure that the deer can't just reach in and then browse the tip of that. Different landscapes for planting. Yes, we did all kinds of different things, trying to plant into garlic mustard, for example, into ash heaps, into all kinds of things. We did not do that systematically, but we didn't pay any attention to what the underlying substrate was, just because we wanted a variation of that. Could the fencing have excluded herbivores other than deer? Yes, it will have excluded cows, which shouldn't be in the woods, or Peter's goats that shouldn't be in the woods, and other herbivores. It would not have excluded rabbits, for example, because rabbits, foxes, other organisms, skunks, they actually make little holes into the exclosures that we have. We have plastic exclosures, and there they can chew little holes in there that the deer wouldn't be able to go through, but they access that. Let's see, go scrolling back here. Okay. Land communities at West Point. Those are all hardwood forest communities. There are papers out there that actually specify more what it is, at least for the tree communities. The plant communities, these are Hudson Highland plant communities that are special for the Hudson River. But there is no difference in terms of being, I have no concerns that this would be applicable to other forest regeneration. And Hudson work that we did was only the kickoff, and we have done a whole bunch of work here in the Finger Lakes region, and the results that we have are being repeated over and over again with other folks that are working, for example, Don Waller in Wisconsin, and the Canadians are folks in Pennsylvania. I already said that I'm happy to share the vegetation protocol. I addressed the effects on birds. These would be large exclosures depending on what kind of birds you would want to be looking at. So it would be the territory size that we know from these birds. You need to plan your exclosures accordingly. Deer and chronic wasting disease in suburban areas. I addressed the Lyme disease issue, chronic wasting disease. The higher the deer density, the easier the transmission of CWD. But I don't know whether there are studies existing about chronic wasting disease in suburbia other than what happened around Madison and Wisconsin. And they're still working on that one, so I can't really answer that. Next one is climate change affecting the deer population. Of course it does. So last year, so the 2014-2015 winter, at least in our area, was pretty harsh, some people say. Actually, that was just a normal winter. It was not really much of a deer kill. They were just going to some of the usual shelter places that they had and then came out in abundance afterwards. There may have been a few pockets where deer have suffered, but the winter wasn't strong enough and long enough with high snow cover that the deer would have suffered a tremendous mortality. If you go further back in the 60s or even much further back, the severity of the winters was much, much harder, and we know that winter kill can be 40 to 60% of a deer herd, and we haven't seen that in the last decade or two. So climate change, yes, it will affect the deer population, particularly winter mortality. I think I addressed the so I will go back to the questions at the bottom in a moment. Do deer help promote the growth of invasive vegetation in suburban areas? Absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the bottom and see whether people entered new questions. Yeah, so Peter just offered that he will post the papers to the social media sites that we have. I'm not sure that he is allowed doing that with copyright stuff from all the journals, but I'm happy to provide that to him, and then he suffers the consequences. So if for some reason this webinar series is abruptly canceled, he may be sitting in jail. So let's see, there's planting tubes for seedlings. I do not like them because they affect the growth, and that's what people have found. Usually the freely planted one catch up with the tube ones. Peter may have something different to say about that. Why do the deer help maintain some of the invasives? So there are two factors there. We don't understand it 100%. One is clearly that they browse the native plants and reduce competition. But there is another one, which is a non-consumptive effect, because we have seen that for species that are not being browsed, native species. And it seems to be a microbial loop, or some people have speculated it's a trampling effect. It's hard for me to imagine so many deer in the woods that they would create compacted soil. But remember that I also said high deer abundance affect earthworms. Earthworms themselves favor invasive plants, and that will be some kind of interaction network that includes microbial species, earthworms, deer, native plant species with different requirements. So there's work that needs to be done, and it's not, I'm not pretending to understand all those subtleties that are happening there. The only thing that I am pretty certain about is the effect that we can measure. The explanations I don't have all at hand. My email address is bb22@cornell.edu. And Peter will post that to the social website as well. Somebody wants the CFE sign-up sheet again, Peter. So CFE, he came late, so okay. So then the red wolf successful in managing deer populations in North Carolina. There are probably less than 100 red wolves, maybe less than 50 in North Carolina. So I don't think that they have any role in managing deer in North Carolina. unless red deer from the comment here refers to something different. There are some indications that on some military installations in the south, coyotes may play a role in limiting deer populations, but that's on very, very isolated places. And those of you that have traveled in the south know that the deer in the south are the size of shepherds, dogs. So there the coyotes may have an easier way of pulling down an adult deer than they have in the northeast. Oh, yes, coyotes will eat corn. Okay. Thanks, Tyler, for Rick, for doing that. I hadn't heard that the coyotes are pushing out deer from the bait sites. Maybe you should bait with corn and not with apples, because I don't know whether you do that. Deer impact on selected plants, Solomon seal, Euonymus americana. Again, fencing is the best way. That's all that I can say about that. It's the physical protection of these plants. Nothing else will work unless you can manipulate your deer densities. Yellowstone Park, wolves keeping the deer from overgrazing riparian areas. That seems to be the case, although there is, as always, some scientific argument over what is happening and whether the wolves are actually responsible for moving the elk out of the riparian areas, and whether the elk numbers plummeted because of the wolf introduction. There is a climate effect in the entire story because there was a big drought that actually killed a whole bunch of elk as well. But now the wolves seeming to do a job as well. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy there. I favor the explanation that the wolves having a major contributing factor, because if you look at all of the data, that seems to be the suggestion that comes out for me is in summary. Do the hunter participants of the DDP have to live in the state or county to get a permit? The permit is not given by the state. We as a municipality or as an individual landowner, you can get a nuisance permit as an individual landowner. I'm only talking about New York State right now. The state asks us that they have a hunting permit and that they're 18 years of age, and we would evaluate them. So for us, they do not have to live in the state or county to be allowed as participants. Okay. There's another one from Rick Tyler. Eliminating most or an entire deer family social group eliminates learned home range and forage range habitats. Offspring that survive culling will continue to learn. Okay. That was probably in terms of the genetic question. Yeah, this is garlic mustard. You can ask me for the message of self-limitation in garlic mustard. The edge effects with smaller exclosures, a question here. That just means that some of the effects that we are studying will not be noticed. If you think about a very small exclosure, an individual earthworm may go from one end of the exclosure to the other if it's only 10 meters in size. Or the plants, we always know that there are edge effects if you're growing close to a wall or in the shade or something like that. Also the microbial communities may not respond if there is a nutrient addition. We think that the feces and the urine that the deer are producing on the outside will favor different microbial responses, faster processing of nutrients, easier palatability of the dung or the deer pellets that are there. So that's something that we see. We just know that by eliminating or by moving to the interior of the exclosures, when we use transects that run through, that the effects are different at the edges versus in the interior. What causes the decrease in earthworms? Thank you very much. When we exclude deer, I wish I knew. Again, we think that this is an effect that is linked to microbial communities. We're working on that one. We don't have a full explanation for that. Okay, here is deer browse greatly reduced near our trails where people and dog walkers are present. I'm not sure where that is. We have plenty of dog walkers. We have plenty of people in all our natural areas at Cornell, Finger Lakes Land Trust. Most of those things are devastated. I know from personal observations that deer know exactly how far dogs can go from people, or when they're on a leash, they know exactly how to behave. If they're used to people, maybe they don't use exactly the trails. I'm not sure how far near means. There's a question from Christina. You said 0 uncaged red oak seedlings survived. That, if I did say that, then I misspoke. No, I'm sorry. You said 0 uncaged red. That's true in some places. So, for example, the Leopold Woods, not a single seedling survived, at least not in the first year that we did that. Okay, scrolling up. So the Connecticut study, again, we can debate this up and down. It is a peninsula. They repeated the results that we know from islands. You take the deer numbers down, Lyme disease plummets down to almost non-existing. If you put it together with the Indiana study that shows that Lyme disease instances in people is a function of deer density, I think we need to open our eyes up for that. And whether it's on the peninsula or whether it's on the mainland situation, probably in the mainland situation where you have so much influx and movement of deer, you may have a more difficult time to do it. Nevertheless, Lyme disease was rampant in the area, and they were able to reduce it down to something very little. I think it takes the willingness of trying it and doing more, because otherwise nobody is wanting to manage white-footed mice, which would be even more difficult than managing deer, I think. What effect does forestry create as we cut? We make numbers of new sprouts on both stumpage and by opening the wooden floor. So you get an easier recruitment of some of the species that would need some light. And the foresters are always saying you can't regenerate oaks unless you do a clear cut or a near clear cut. And that may be simply favoring a recovery from stump sprouts, and the growth rate will be much higher than when you plant a seedling. Just think how long humans have been in North America. The oaks have been here way before. We didn't need to, well, maybe the mastodons or somebody else pushed over the trees, and they could recruit quicker. But increased light levels with high deer abundance will increase the colonization of invasive plants if they're in the area. That's something that we very often see. But in some places, and I'm not sure where you are, whoever asked that, even the stump sprouts are not making it if the deer densities are high enough. Assessing deer populations. So I answered the one about garlic mustard. When assessing deer populations, suburban areas for Sentinel plant, which you recommend. So that depends on where you are. We used red oak in part because it has a very large distribution. So what we did here in the Northeast can easily be repeated somewhere else. It's an abundant plant species where we can collect acorns reasonably easy. If you have some other areas, I'm happy to respond to I guess it's from Joellen Lampman, to help you out with wherever you are. I would think oaks are a great one to use. The spacing for the red oak plantings, we use a few meters, so a few yards between individual oaks. And as I said, we're assessing about the deer impact on a 5-acre area. We early on used larger distances between the individual oaks, and even now we put them in a grid because it's easier for us to recover them. And it didn't seem to make a difference. So whatever is possible in your area where you want to do it, or you can do multiple clumps. I wouldn't put them closer than 3 or than 4 or 5 meters, 4 or 5 yards. I think I'm through most of the questions. Let me go all the way back down. How does increasing forest canopy cover help minimize the growth of invasive plant species and subsequently excessive deer browse? So the first part of this question is easy. It's just limiting light levels. The second one, I'm not sure that I actually agree with that increasing forest canopy cover minimizes subsequently excessive deer browse. I'm not quite sure, Carl, that I understand that question. Okay, next one. Difference between earthworms in the woods with earthworms in an ag field. Are they the same? Are they all non-native? The last two questions, yes and yes, are all non-native, at least over most of the U.S. There are native earthworms in the south. There's some native earthworms in the Palouse prairie in the Pacific Northwest. Are they all the same species? Absolutely. And so the mantra in in ag fields coming from Europe is that earthworms aerate the soil. That may be the case when you work with heavy machinery and plowing. In the forest, we actually see earthworm colonization, particularly, or the deep burrowing nightcrawler that can go down to 2 meters, that we actually see a compaction, not an aeration. And we see runoff of hillsides once you have earthworms in the system. So we're losing the fertility on the hillsides, goes down into the riparian areas and into our streams. That's almost like after the first clear cutting. So the earthworms are creating a compaction. That may actually be the same in ag fields if they're under no-till, but that would be something that I would need to take a look at and see whether people have actually done that. Okay, Peter will look at some of the things that are for him about certificates. Will you do a webinar about fencing? Maybe. I could do that at some point. That would create a little more work for me. If you're close by, it's from Brew. We have plenty of fences here, and I have hosted field days to go and show people in person of what that looks like, how you can do it, and I'm happy to do that. Here's a question about coy wolves. I don't like the word. There are some interbreedings, the coyotes and wolves that we have. Our coyotes have some wolf genes in them. They do not have an impact on the deer populations in New York as far as we know. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Rick, for clarifying how you're baiting with corn and apples, because I know that apples are a major component of the coyote diet, at least in the fall. Hunting method was worked but did not. So this is from Eric. But that's for Pete, maybe. So I can go into the hunting methods. I don't think there's any difference. So the question is what worked and what did not work. As long as people can shoot their bows and crossbows and they can hit their targets, that works really well. Making sure that places are baited every time. Make sure that the feeders are being set to an evening time, so that the squirrels and ravens and jays and crows and turkeys don't eat most of the feed during the day. That's important. We like to have it run half an hour to an hour before dark. We bait early on with more material than so that we have the deer come in. Again, the persistence pays off. Have bait on the ground every single day. It's like having a bar that only occasionally is open. Very few customers will go there because it's unpredictable. Use trail cams to monitor deer activity so that we know we only go out when the deer are there. And then variations, seeing where the deer are coming from, making sure that sometimes we have silhouettes in trees, so when the deer come out of the woods or somewhere in the woods and approach a tree, they look up and see whether there is a person in the woods or in the tree stand. We vary tree stands versus ground blinds, and that's important. So you need to become almost unpredictable. And what we have seen is that the deer circle around downwind very quickly, even in suburban areas where early on they would never do that. So we have been successful in, if they have a particular approach that they like to come to certain bait sites, that we go towards where they enter a piece of woods or where they're always coming out. So instead of being right at the bait, we're sitting further away and we intercept them that way. We like to be at least at 20 yards, 20, 25, where we have the bait and the tree stand. If you get too close, the shots are becoming less or more problematic because they're more downhill, and the deer will see any movement very, very quickly, even at night, so they become alert. I can go into some details about the light sources that we use. Doesn't really matter much, but they can be too bright. While deer don't supposedly see red light, they will react to brightness differences. That sometimes depends on the year. This year they seem to be much more docile than last year, and it depends on some of the individuals as well. There's some other little tricks that we have that would require almost a demonstration. I think these are the important one. Oh, let me talk about it. Early on, when you start a program, you may have 5, 10, 20 deer come up to a bait. We do not engage them at that point, meaning we do not shoot because we educate too many. So we like individual deer that are coming to the bait sites. That's not always happening. Early on, you have big deer groups. Later on, it will be much, much thinner. I like to engage the first deer that comes in. The others are still further away. Some other people have a different approach and allow multiple ones to come in and be comfortable feeding and then shoot them. So there are the different individual approaches that may or may not work. That's as far as I want to go into it. The webinar will be posted on YouTube, but not all of it. Deer scaring approaches work effectively in suburban areas? Absolutely not. Shall we get rid of earthworms in our gardens? Good luck if you can. I don't think you need to. I'm not concerned about earthworms in your gardens. I'm concerned about earthworms in the forest. The biggest thing, we do not know how to manage earthworms at the present time. There's no way that we have. What we do when we work in areas that do not have earthworms here in New York, we implement sanitary procedures. We scrub our boots. We go from earthworm-free areas to earthworm-infested areas, not vice versa if we can do that. Big equipment always brings earthworms in the gardens, and the most effective way of transporting earthworms is through potting soil and mulch. So avoid introducing mulch from areas that are not certified earthworm-free, and I don't know that any are. You put a mulch pile anywhere, whether it's leaves or something else, earthworms will colonize it. You use it to do walkways in areas or others, you will bring earthworms with you. Buying potted plants to beautify your woods is probably the greatest danger that you can have, because any potted plant will have to set out somewhere and you will bring earthworms with it, so avoid that. I only do bare root or seeds if I do anything in my forest. So there's a comment about deer in jail. Let's see, what was that all about? No deer present in jail as far as I know. Okay, so Rick, thank you for your comment about deer reductions and good rate on oak growth. Thank you for that. Okay. Somebody wants 2 credits for this webinar. No, not sure whether Peter can do that. He says no. New Jersey. What's the "we are in New Jersey" from? Oh, that was Brew, and then I forgot, Brew, what you were talking about. What I was. Oh, to see the fences. Yeah, if you can come up to New York, Brew, that would be lovely. On the other hand, there are people that have done that at Rutgers as well. They've enclosed some big private estates in New Jersey. I can put you in touch with some of those folks. Just send me an email. I can try doing that. Yeah. Let's see what we got here. Large-scale hardwood planting over 10 acres. What recommendations for protecting seedlings from deer? If you can't fence the whole area, I don't have a good solution. I mean, that's what the folks in Europe are doing, right? That's what the people in, I think, in the Allegheny National Forest are doing. You have 10 acres. That's a lot. Yeah, so Peter just mentioned the tubes are too expensive to do that. Again, I'm not sure what else to suggest other than fencing. I'm sorry, there's no good solution for that. Peter, post the CEU sign-up link. That's a question again here. Okay, are you familiar with using tea-treated seed meal to eradicate earthworms used in China? No, I'm not. I self this with compost. So I wonder what that is. So I've seen some people experiment with acidifying soils because earthworms do not like soils with with low pH. I'm sorry. But on the other hand, that's what we were worried about with acid rain, right? So we don't want to acidify our forest further. And I don't know what the tea tree seed meal is. I would need to look into that, and I will actually do that. If you could send a link, that would be lovely. at least we could test it. There's all kinds of claims about the effectiveness of deer repellent on the web as well, and I know how that turns out to be. Gene driver technology, well, to get rid of earthworms. Not sure how well that works on earthworms. I know it works in flies, and I will go to Peter. You have a question here. Would you please address that? You can speak into this microphone. This one here.
Okay. So all of when you registered to get your registration access code, you completed a questionnaire that provides me the information I need to provide your continuing education credit. So there's no further action required.
All right. The storm of questions has calmed down to, oh, yeah, I know that the tree species is a camellia, thanks. Drives to the surface and they desiccate. Okay, thank you for that. I will take a look at that. What I wonder if it drives the worms to the surface, that seems to be a skin irritant. We do that with the mustard solution that we have. They also come to the surface, although they don't stay there and then they go back down. If it drives worms to the surface, I wonder whether that has an effect on salamanders. So that would be my initial concern there. But again, I would just need to take a look at that. Okay. Okay, I appreciate all the positive feedback. All the people that hated it went off, and so early on, it looks like there's still 45 people hanging in here. So go have lunch, guys. I appreciate that. If you can't get enough, you can dial in again tonight at 7. I will need something to drink now. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.